Hey everyone, my name's Lisa Franks and I live in my wheelchair accessible camper van. I travel solo all across Canada and the US, and I take you on adventures on my YouTube channel. I show what it's like to do adaptive mountain biking, adaptive surfing, paragliding, or even just the day-to-day challenges I face while living in a van and using a wheelchair. But before I lived in the van, I had a very different lifestyle. I actually competed for Team Canada in wheelchair racing and wheelchair basketball. I attended 3 Paralympic Games and I came home with a little bit of hardware. I'm filming this in August of 2024 and the Paris Paralympics are about to kick off. So to celebrate that, I thought I would talk about my experience at the Paralympic Games, and I'm going to answer all of the burning questions that you have submitted. Before I answer all your questions, I'm going to get a little more comfortable in my hammock, and I'm just going to enjoy this beautiful lakefront view that I have. I've been under the weather for almost 2 weeks now, and I'm through the worst of it, starting to get my energy back. But I tell you, there's only one time that I don't like being in the van, and that's when I'm sick. I just can't seem to get comfortable, and I've been missing my exercise, but hopefully I can get back to some adventures soon for all of you guys and for myself. But in the meantime, I thought it'd be a good opportunity to hype up the upcoming Paralympics and to answer some questions you have submitted through Instagram or YouTube, and just a little informative video to get to know me a bit better and know more about the Paralympics. So first off, some of you might not even know what the Paralympics are. Paralympics are the equivalent to the Olympics for the top athletes in the world with a disability. We compete in many of the same sports as the Olympics. They're just adapted to our function and ability. The Paralympics are held 2 weeks after the Olympics in the same city and the same competition venues, the same athletes village as the Olympics. And that goes for both summer and winter. Olympics and Paralympics, they're held the same. And Paralympics is spelled Paralympics, Paralympics. There's no O, it's not Para-Olympics. Some people maybe mistakenly think that the word Paralympics comes from paralyzed or paraplegic. That's not the case at all. It's actually kind of a form of the word parallel, because they're held in parallel with the Olympics. I want to take a brief moment to talk about the language of the Paralympics. It's really important that the word Paralympics or Paralympian gets used more mainstream. I'm often introduced as an Olympian, and that kind of makes me cringe because I didn't compete at the Olympics. I competed at the Paralympics. And it matters because I think people try to maybe upsell my title as an Olympian, but the only way we're ever gonna get equality with the Paralympics and the Olympics is if people use the word more and give value to the word Paralympics. So if you ever run into me, don't try to upsell me and call me an Olympian. I'm absolutely proud to say that I competed at the Paralympic Games. I need to use this word more often so there's more acceptance and more awareness about it. The Paralympics have their own symbol, so the Olympics have the Olympic rings and the Paralympics have the agato. I'm probably butchering that pronunciation, but it's a different symbol and it represents Paralympic athletes and the Paralympics. So the Paralympics this year are going to be held from August 28th to September 8th in Paris. The Olympics just wrapped up there, and now it's time for the top disabled athletes in the world to shine. There will be 22 sports this year and 170 nations. A lot of the sports are the same as the Olympics, they're just adapted for people with disabilities. So track and field, for example, has wheelchair racing, which is what I competed in. It has sprinting events for people with like lower limb or upper limb amputations, and they just compete against people with the same function and ability as them. There's wheelchair basketball, there's swimming, there's equestrian even, and some of the sports that are unique to the Paralympics are goalball and bocce. So goalball is, I don't know how to explain it, it's an indoor court sport, and everyone has a visual impairment and wears a blindfold, and then they have a ball that has a bell in it, and they try to score using the ball and the bell and just the sound of it. It's a very unique sport, check it out. So my time at the Paralympics really was a lifetime ago. I competed at my first Paralympics in Sydney in 2000, so Sydney, Australia, and that was in wheelchair racing. I had only been in a wheelchair for 4 years. In fact, I watched the 1996 Paralympic Games from my hospital bed where I was just getting adjusted to life in a wheelchair. At Sydney, I came home with 4 gold and 1 silver medal in wheelchair racing. 4 years later, in Athens, Greece, I competed at the 2004 Paralympics, again in wheelchair racing. I came home with 2 gold medals and 2 world records. And then I made a big switch after Athens in 2004. I actually switched completely to a different sport and competed for Canada at wheelchair basketball. And in 2008, I went to the Beijing Paralympics, and our team placed 5th in wheelchair basketball. So I first heard about the Paralympics when I was in the hospital in 1996, and prior to the Paralympics going on that summer, I had actually met a few Paralympic athletes. They had heard that I had been an athlete before my spinal cord injury, and they came to visit me in the hospital. I got to play some wheelchair rugby with them, and then I got to actually watch them compete at the Paralympics in 1996. And so that was an amazing thing to have these people that I'd met in real life, and I was watching them on TV and seeing them compete and seeing the amazing things that they were doing. And so sport became a huge part of my life. It became a huge part of my recovery. And I actually met who would become my track coach while I was in the hospital. He was married to my physiotherapist. What a stroke of luck that was, because he introduced me to wheelchair racing. And within 1 year of starting wheelchair racing, and really within 1 year of being paralyzed, I was at a national track meet called the Canada Games. And from there, my career just took off. I started just getting faster and faster, and then eventually in 1999, I was invited to try out for Team Canada. I made the team, and then in 2000, I had selections for the Paralympic team, and I made the team and was able to represent Canada in Sydney, Australia. In Sydney, I had 5 races, and for each race, you have to go through qualifiers. So you go through semifinals to get to the finals, and so it was a very busy event. I was 18 years old at the time. I had actually just enrolled in university and then had to leave to go compete at the Paralympics, and left for about 6 weeks. But I competed in the 100 meter, the 200 meter, the 400 meter, the 800, and the 1500 meter. And I took silver in the 100 and gold in the rest. When I came home from Sydney, the outpouring of support was amazing, especially in my hometown of Moose Jaw. They closed down Main Street and they threw a parade for me. They presented this key to the city to me. And then I even did a couple talk shows. I flew out to Vancouver, BC, and did a talk show. Daytime television was new to me. The support was amazing, and I think it was extra special because only 4 years earlier, the entire town of Moose had kind of rallied around me as I had my spinal cord injury. I had a very rare condition that I was actually paralyzed from the neck down. And to go from that in 1996 to 2000 being on top of the world really was something incredible, and I think everyone had a reason to celebrate. Probably one of my favorite memories from Sydney was the 1500 meter race. It's uploaded. I uploaded it several years ago, but it was a very close race that came right down to the wire, and I just remember them placing this medal around my neck, and I was taken up to the top of the stadium that seats 120,000 people, and this medal was placed around my neck, and I got to look at the entire stadium, and people were standing up and listening to "Oh Canada," and I could see in the distance there was like a jumbotron with my face on it, and the crowd in the background and the Canadian flag intermixed on the jumbotron. And I remember just thinking, how did this happen? Like 4 years earlier, I was watching the Paralympics from my hospital bed, and at that moment I was just truly on top of the world. So this is the gold medals from Sydney. You can see it's got the Sydney Harbour and the bridge, and then all around it's got all the different competition venues where all the sports were held on the back. So it has the old Paralympic branding. It's been since rebranded, and it has my name and my time and distance in each race, or in each one of them. Going into Sydney, I was kind of an unknown. I'd been to a few international competitions, but I'd never been to a Paralympics, and so I think I had that little edge where people didn't know what to expect from me. And then Athens was a completely different ballgame. I now was the target. I was the person to beat. My coach had thrown out the challenge in a media scrum. He told everybody that if I didn't come home with 2 gold and 2 world records, that would be a disappointment. It's one thing to say you want to win a gold medal, but to say you want to break a world record is a whole different thing, because there's so many things you can't control about the wind and the weather on that particular day. But as it all unfolded, luckily I had good conditions and was able to come home with 2 gold medals and 2 world records. My distances in Athens went from 5 in Sydney to 2 in Athens. And a lot of the reason of that is because of the standard you have to qualify to get to the Paralympics, and it's usually a portion of the world record. And unfortunately, I had kind of done the damage where I was setting the world records and people weren't able to attain the percentage of world record to be able to qualify for the Paralympics. And so that's why we went from 5 events to only 2 events in Athens. So I won gold in the 200 and 400 meters in Athens. And this is the medal. It's again got the scene of Athens with the Acropolis. And what I think is really neat on the back is you turn it over and it has Braille. So that's for people with visual impairments, and they can still make out what is written on the medal. Man, these are my medals from Sydney. No, these are my medals from Athens. Whew. There's a little bit of heft to them. Well, Athens was wrapping up. I already knew that was going to be my last Paralympics for wheelchair racing. I had made some good friends with the Canadian women's wheelchair basketball team, and I had been playing as a provincial athlete, as a local athlete for many years. And a few of the players had approached me and wanted me to try out for the Canadian team. I was on board. I was looking forward to a new challenge. There's not a lot of turnover for the women's wheelchair basketball team, and so I knew it would be a challenge just to even try to crack the lineup. But so I actually came home from Athens and did a media tour and stuff like that for 2 weeks, and then I left my home and went to stay with some of the Canadian wheelchair basketball players, and I trained with them in Edmonton. They kind of took me under their wing and tried to prepare me for the next tryouts for Team Canada, and I didn't make it that tryouts, but in 2006 I made Team Canada. I became the first woman from Saskatchewan to be named to the Canadian wheelchair basketball team. In 2006 we actually won a world championships in Amsterdam for wheelchair basketball, and so we had high hopes going into the 2008 Paralympics, but just didn't find our luck, didn't find our groove. We ended up off of the podium and in 5th place. It was the first time Team Canada had been off the podium in almost 20 years at a Paralympic Games. So it was a big disappointment. A lot of things went wrong, and we just didn't perform when we needed to perform. I had actually been struggling for all of 2008. In early 2008, I had a shoulder injury to this right shoulder after a fall on the basketball court. And as soon as I got home from the Paralympics in Beijing, I went into surgery for that shoulder injury. I had just been hanging on all season trying to get through the Paralympics because I didn't have enough time for surgery before it. So I had the surgery after, and then complications came from that surgery, and on it went. And that really was the end of my sports career, that surgery. In 2008, I kept trying to get back to play, but my shoulder was never the same, and I ended up having 4 surgeries in total and living with chronic pain for a number of years. I eventually did get back to playing recreationally, and I enjoyed it for a few years, but then I kept comparing what I used to be able to do on the basketball court before my shoulder injury, and just decided it was time to move on and start a new chapter, and Vanlife kind of filled that void for me. I'm gonna get to the questions now that you guys submitted on YouTube and Instagram. So, first one by Andy says, how does this much awesomeness fit into one person? I think that's a compliment. I don't know how to answer that, but I'll just say thank you. Next question is, can you talk about how meeting diverse people with diverse disabilities affects one, if it does? One of the things I think folks don't realize about disability is that it's not only diverse by intersection, not just by type of disability, but for how long someone's been dealing with ableism. So that's a really good point. That's I could do a whole video on that, but when I attended the Paralympics, I was exposed to, the whole gauntlet of disabilities. I had meeting people that were short stature, that had limb amputations, cerebral palsy, visual impairments, and I think the thing I can take home the most from that is just how fortunate I am to be from Canada and really North America. I remember, watching teams come into the opening ceremonies, and people didn't have proper crutches or wheelchairs, and, they were just hobbling by with a stick. And so it really made me appreciate all the healthcare that I do have in Canada, even though it's incredibly expensive to buy the equipment that I need. At least I have access to it. And I think it just makes you appreciate even more when you're surrounded by all those people. You just appreciate how much everybody at the Paralympics has been through just to get there, right? They not only have they trained and worked really hard to qualify for the Paralympics, but they've probably gone through some traumatic stuff in their life. And the thing that I always take away from that is that everyone is so happy and positive, and it's such a joyful atmosphere to be around. And I think it's also interesting to see the disparity between people at the Paralympics and not at the Paralympics, right? If they're at the Paralympics, they've probably figured life out with their disability. They're probably thriving very well. And then I go back home and it's like you see somebody in the mall and you can tell that they haven't accepted their disability. They're not doing very well. And so, it really makes you see the disparity in those situations. How much money do the athletes gain in the Paralympics versus the Olympics? Okay, great question. I'm gonna answer for both Canada and the US because that's the only ones I know. I know a lot of countries actually don't offer any sort of compensation if you win a medal at the Paralympics. In Canada, the Olympics, they get 20,000 for gold, 15 for silver, and 10 for bronze. And in 2024, for the first year ever, Paralympians will also receive that amount of money for a medal. It's the first year that they've had this equality, and it's important to point out that the Canadian Paralympic team is funded a little bit differently than the Canadian Olympic Committee. The Canadian Olympic Committee has had this prize purse for a while, and it was through a private donation actually that the Paralympics finally started to get it this year. With the US has been equal since 2018, and they get 37,500 for gold, that's US, 22,500 for silver, and 15,000 for bronze, and that's been again equal since 2018. All right, next question. I'm wondering about the downturn with emotions after gearing yourself up for the Paralympics with all your focus, but then it's over seemingly overnight. And that is a real thing. There's something they call the Olympic or Paralympic depression, and it's a very real thing because you put your life on hold for 4 years. You know, Paralympic or Olympics are a cycle of 4 years, and everything is geared up towards that. And so I can remember coming back from Sydney and just being like that letdown of like, okay, now what? I think I always had the benefit. I was always working towards something. So after Sydney, I was working towards breaking 7 world records, and so I still had that to look forward to. After Athens, I was looking forward to making Team Canada. After Beijing, I was just looking forward to surgery. I think after Beijing, mine was the worst because I had my surgery, I had pain, things weren't going well after surgery, and I didn't have many good things happening in my life. It got to a point where I couldn't even train. Like probably that was the worst period in my life. And I think it was more the injury than not having, something to train for. There are athletes that have only done their chosen sport for their entire life. I had the bonus of, always being in school or working full-time as well. So aside from sport, I always had something to work on. But there are athletes that don't have that, and those are the ones that really do suffer. All right, do you go into schools at all to talk about your achievements? I do, actually, yeah. In the lead up to 2004, I had a big opportunity to travel to several schools in Saskatchewan. I think I was doing one a day for a few weeks at a time, and all the way from kindergarten to grade 8 usually. And since then, I've done for the past several years, since COVID actually, I've done a program called Never Give Up with the Saskatchewan Sports Hall of Fame. And every spring and fall, we go in and over Zoom, we speak to kids, usually grade 6 age. And so I've spoken to hundreds of students every year, and it's really nice to be able to tell them what the Paralympics is all about and spread the message of never give up if you are faced with an obstacle. Okay, next question, is barefoot just to lose weight? So I think you're referring to in my racing videos and pictures, I'm actually not wearing any shoes. And yeah, that's right, I don't feel the need to have shoes on. It's not like my feet need the protection in my racing wheelchair, and every ounce matters when you're talking about a short race like a 100-meter race. So yeah, it certainly is an advantage to not have shoes. What did it feel like when you got the world record? I actually held 7 world records at one time, in the distances from the 100-meter up to the 42-kilometer marathon, or So the first time I did it was pretty special. I knew I was getting close to it, and we were at a very first fast track in Toronto, and they announced it over the speaker that I had made the world record. And of course, yeah, I just had to celebrate. And then it was around that point that a lot of the coaches started to take a big interest in me. They'd started to talk more and more about qualifying for the Paralympics and all the amazing places that the sport could take me. How many hours did you train each week to achieve your goals? So that varied very much on where I was in the season, especially with wheelchair racing. Leading into my volume training, I'd probably be doing about 4 to 5 hours a day, 5 days a week. That's mixed of being on the track or in the weight room. Basketball was very different because I'd train locally with my team and then travel probably a week out of every month, either for a competition or training camp somewhere. So when I was locally training at home, I'd probably be doing, about 14 hours a week, over 5 days. And then having very intense training camps with the team where we'd be doing 2 practices a day for an entire week, and games kind of as well in that week. So it was very intense, and I'd say in my last few years I was taking about 20 weeks a year off of work just to be able to train and travel. Did you ever injure yourself during training? Yes, I did. So wheelchair racing, it wasn't as demanding. I just had to be careful of repetitive motion and not overtraining really. But I did end up with like overuse in my elbow and in my shoulder, but just easy physio and massage helped me get through it. With wheelchair basketball, I initially had an injury in my elbow. I think it was called golfer's elbow. And then again, I had a major injury after a fall on the basketball court during a game, and that dislocated my shoulder and led to reoccurring dislocations and multiple shoulder surgeries. And that was pretty well the end of my sports career when my shoulder surgery had complications. What is your next big dream? I have a big undertaking. A little over a year from now, I plan on biking around Iceland. So it's going to be about 75 miles or 120 kilometers a day for 2 weeks straight. And we'll be camping, and there's a group of 10 adaptive athletes that are embarking on this. So I am going to have to start. I was training until I got sick, and I was trying to get some more volume on my bike, and so I'm gonna have to really buckle down and be able to manage 120 kilometers a day on my bike. So it's gonna be an interesting year to get ready for that. Which Paralympics was the least accessible? So all of the villages, I would say, were very accessible. Sydney was a bit strange because the athletes where we stayed it was a little neighborhood, and they basically built houses that would eventually be sold for regular residential use. And so my bedroom in Sydney was actually the garage, and my roommate and I had this modified room that was in a garage, but it was very accessible. Although I will say that at some of the athletes villages, the apartments where we'd stay would have elevators in them, and those could get really slow, and you'd have to be waiting because there'd be a lot of people that needed the elevator. All of the villages were accessible. I'd say the cities, Athens and Beijing, China, were not as accessible. Sydney was great, but Athens had a lot of cobblestone, so even just trying to get around and sightsee wasn't easy. I kind of got to the Acropolis one day, and then Beijing, didn't have a lot of time to sightsee, but we did get to go see the Great Wall of China one day, and that wasn't really accessible. It had a gondola or like a chairlift that we could take to a point, but then it was all stairs along the Great Wall of China, so we actually hired people to carry us, the people that needed wheelchairs, and they carried us for as long as we wanted to go. At one point we had to just say, no, we've seen enough, that's good. So it was neat, but definitely couldn't get around there independently. How did you first set your eyes on Olympic gold? Were you always about the Olympics? Okay, so yes, I was actually always about the Olympics. I was very athletic as a kid. I remember gymnastics, signing like I want to be an Olympian card. And then as I got older, it just became about basketball. And I would envision myself as being like Michael Jordan, making that game-winning shot. And so it was always on my mind that I just wanted to compete against the best athletes in the world. When I had my spinal cord injury, I thought that was not going to happen. But I got to meet Paralympic athletes who came to visit me in the hospital, and if anything, doors didn't close, they opened up for me, and I was just kind of put into the stream of the Paralympics and the Paralympic cycle right away. So I remember in 1996 watching the Paralympics and thinking, yeah, I want to be there in 4 years, and luckily made it happen. Were your family members supportive? Yes, absolutely. I think once I got involved in wheelchair racing, they could see that I had that spark back. Something they called the Lisa look is where I'd be really, really determined and competitive in an event once I started sports. And it was helping me adapt to this life using a wheelchair as well. How did you find a coach in Saskatchewan? I was absolutely lucky. Like I said, my physiotherapist, when I was first recovering from my spinal cord injury, was married to a Paralympic athlete. His name is Clayton Garine, and he competed in wheelchair racing. He came to just meet me at the hospital and show me some tricks in a wheelchair, and then he asked if I wanted to give wheelchair racing a try. And apparently I had a talent for going around in circles, and within a year I was at a national track meet and asked Clayton to be my coach. He was just an athlete himself, but he took it upon himself, and together we traveled the world, and he became my coach while he was still also competing. Are you all summer sports, or do you do winter too? I've only ever competed at the Paralympics in the summer sports. I can downhill ski, but I've never tried it competitively. I'm not very good. It's just a sport that I do for fun. Are there other sports you feel you might have qualified in? I might have maybe made it for wheelchair rugby. I played it when I was first in the hospital, and for a few years. I might have, I had good ball handling skills, but I never really followed through with it because racing and basketball took up my time. And possibly swimming. I think I've got a decent backstroke and I like distance, so I may have qualified for those. What was your favorite team to play against, such as good sportsmanship, fun banter, laughs? So I would have to say probably the teams that we see the most would have been Australia, and they were so fun to play against. Australians, so this is actually an Australian player that asked me, they were the scrappiest team to ever play against. It was always fun, but you also knew that they were just kind of going to be the scrappiest team out there. Where do you train? So I would train locally wherever I was living. With wheelchair racing, I would just train on the streets outside my house. And then one year I actually went to Australia during the winter so I could train outside all year round. With wheelchair basketball, I would train locally with a team, several teams actually, and then probably once a month the whole team Canada would get together and we'd travel somewhere and go train and maybe have some games as well. How was the Olympic Village food? It was really good. I mean, I want to say that the cafeteria in the Olympic Village was the size of a football field. Like, it was massive. Anything that you wanted, you could get, and I think it was open 24/7. They had McDonald's in there, so that was always my go-to after I'd win a race or something. I'd go celebrate by getting a hamburger and french fries and a milkshake. But yeah, it was really good food. Just anything you wanted, you could get. Do you miss racing? No, actually I don't. I liked it. It was exactly what I needed at the time when I was doing it. And same goes for basketball. It was exactly what I needed while I was doing it. But to the thought of putting on spandex and sliding into a racing chair, which is really custom fit and small, just does not appeal to me. I'm much more inclined to, get on a bike and go for a recreational ride these days. Did you have more fun in solo or team events? I would definitely have to say team events. It's Team Canada had 12 players and then a whole bunch of coaching staff and physiotherapists, and it was just so much fun to travel with them and work towards something common. With wheelchair racing, yes, I was on Team Canada track and field, but we're kind of all doing our own individual things and sometimes even competing against your roommate or something like that. So I spent a lot of time with the people that I played wheelchair basketball with, and you just got to know them so well. And we had so much fun, especially when you're so tired and everything is hilarious and you're in a separate country. And the giggle fits definitely were often. What event was your favorite on the track? Long distance events. So I'm not a very strong sprinter. I don't have a fast twitch muscle in my body. I was always the last person off the starting line. So those sprints, it was just like me trying to catch up. The distance always appealed to me because once I could get that top speed up, I could kind of just hold it. It didn't matter if it was for 800 meters or 42 kilometers. I had a very strong threshold to keep that top speed up, and the distance also put in an extra factor. So like the marathon, for example, there's drafting and you can tuck in behind a group of people and save some energy, or the tactics of when to make a move or when to sit back and play it safe was always very appealing to me. So definitely the distance just seems more interesting instead of just pushing for 12 seconds as fast as you can in a sprint. What is your funniest experience at a games? Always just the last night after a Paralympic, like the night before everyone is leaving. Things just get pretty wild. Sydney, one of the last nights, I remember Patrick Anderson, who was Team Canada basketball player, broke out his guitar, and there was just a bonfire in the middle of the street and everyone hanging out around this fire as he was singing and everyone singing along. So that was probably one of the nicest memories I have of that. And then Athens, the last couple of nights, I had a few beverages and remember having a conversation in French with a French basketball player because one of my close friends was moving to France and I was trying to lecture him to make sure she's taken care of, and I was doing it all in French thanks to some liquid courage. What's your favorite moment? What medal were you most excited to win? I'd say the 1500 meter race in Sydney. It was a close race, and I actually got it posted on my channel. You can go back several years ago and watch it, but I made a lot of mistakes in that. I tried to overtake the Japanese competitor in the final corner, instead of just being patient and waiting till the home stretch. But it all worked out in the end, and it gave the fans a really great race to watch. Did you get freaky in the village? I'm sorry to disappoint. No, I didn't get freaky in the village. I was always pretty serious when the competition was on, and then I'd let loose a little bit once it was over, but I still tried to keep a pretty good image. What was the best and worst part about the Paralympics? Certainly the best part was just meeting amazing people and getting to travel and experience all the great things that come with that. What's the worst part about it? I sacrificed a lot. I missed out on a lot of things because I was traveling, and I put my body through a lot of abuse as well. I've got chronic shoulder injury because of it. But still, if I were to go do it all over again, knowing that this is how I would end up, I'd probably still go ahead and do it. Was it exciting for you to have your parents there watching? It was, yeah. Especially I remember in Sydney, the crowds were incredibly supportive, and after one of my races I was supposed to meet up with my parents somewhere, but we couldn't connect because they were getting mobbed because they were, the parents of a medalist, and I was busy signing autographs, and we were trying to find each other in the stadium through all these crowds. And then with wheelchair basketball, they didn't really get to see me compete until the Beijing Paralympics. Like, they could see me play back home with a local club team that was kind of like beer league, but for the first time they got to see me compete at a high level at the Beijing Paralympics. What would be at the top of the list of the things you don't miss about training and competing? I guess not having to drag myself to a practice when I don't feel like going. I don't have to wake up at those god-awful hours anymore and go train when it's cold or just poor conditions. Also, the funny thing to note too, now that I've been sick, it made me think of this. I can actually take regular cough medicine. Before, I was always getting drug tested, and so I had to be really careful what I would ingest in my body. I'd also have to fill out something called a whereabouts form, so I had to basically let the doping agency know where I'd be, whether I'd be at the office Monday through Friday for these hours, and then times I'd be at the gym, or if I'd be traveling for a competition. I had to fill out these forms to let them know, and somebody could show up at any time and do a drug test, and they did. They came to my house a few times. They tracked me down in Australia when I was training there on my own. And so not having to worry about that is a big load off my back, because I used to always have to be careful. I couldn't even take certain cold medications, things like that. And now I can take the good stuff. What do you miss the most? Definitely the people. I've made some really lifelong friendships, and you go through so much with your teammates, and you go through the most bizarre situations and train together and get disappointed together when you don't do well. And so I really miss those friendships, working together towards a common goal. But now that I actually have the van, I've been able to connect with some of the teammates that I hadn't seen in so long. And so I now make a point of traveling to visit them when I'm on the road. How did you train in the snow season? Well, for wheelchair racing, I had something called a roller, and it's kind of like an indoor treadmill, and so it wasn't fun. I didn't like to use it, but also one year I took an entire winter semester off from school, and I went to Australia. So in January of 2004, it was their summer, so I spent our Canadian winter in Australia one time, and it was great. How much do you make once you get carded? Okay, so in Canada, if you are on a national team, you get something called carding, or a training allowance. Canadian athletes receive the same as able-bodied athletes. Doesn't matter if you're Paralympic or Olympic. And I was receiving, I think it was $1,500 a month as a training allowance. At the time, it was actually pretty good, especially just being a student. My tuition was paid for through sports. I had academic scholarships. That was just money in my pocket, and then also having the training allowance. So I came out of university with zero debt, a degree, and a house. So, it set me up pretty well. Most people don't have that experience, but because I was a medal winning athlete, I did get some extra funding as well. Was it all expenses to get you there? So yes, the Paralympics themselves, my flights and accommodations and all of that was covered. However, to be on Team Canada, I had to pay, I don't know, it was a couple $100s a year. So it's like I paid that to Team Canada, but then got to go to the Paralympics for free. But to be able to even get to the Paralympics, there was a lot of other competitions that I had to attend, for whether it was basketball or track. I had to, self-fund a lot of it to be able to even get to the competitions that would qualify me to be at the Paralympics. So in a sense, yes, the Paralympics were paid for, but it took a lot of expenses to be able to just get to a position to be qualified and to be able to be selected for the Paralympics. How do you possibly get any sleep before a big race or game? Is your performance affected by lack of sleep? I certainly did have difficulty falling asleep before a big race, but a lot of the time races or games would be later in the day, so it's not. So once I got to sleep, I was actually pretty good, and I could kind of manage to sleep in until 9 or 10 o'clock, even if I needed it. So falling asleep was the issue, but I could usually make up for it by just sleeping in later in the day. When I went to Beijing, though, I was having a lot of trouble sleeping with my shoulder injury. So I actually did have our team doctor prescribe me some sleeping medication, which wasn't ideal, but it helped me get through those weeks leading up to the games. And did the lack of sleep affect my performance? Yes, it certainly did. Maybe not when I was younger. My first games, I was 18 and 22, and so that definitely, you're young, you rebound when you don't get a good night's sleep. But yeah, definitely as the older I get, the more it would impact me. And for the most part, though, adrenaline and everything going through your body would help you overcome that lack of sleep. How much downtime did you have, and did you stay in the Olympic Village? So yeah, I did always stay in the village, and I didn't have a lot of downtime. In Sydney, I had 5 races, and that meant qualifying rounds, so I had to qualify to get, go through the semifinals to get to the finals. So I think I had one day where I went to visit my parents' host family. So my parents actually got to stay with a local family. They opened up their home, and so I went to have a barbecue with them and visit their child's school. And so Sydney was incredibly busy. Athens, I had one day where I went and did some sightseeing and went shopping and saw the Acropolis. And in Beijing, I had one day where we went to see the Great Wall of China. But pretty much just you're getting your practice sessions in if you're not in competition. So there's not a lot of downtime. Both Sydney and Beijing I had been to before. In the year before, they had done some practice competitions. So I had already seen a little bit of the town or the cities. So it wasn't that big of a deal to miss out during the Paralympics. What was the media like? It seems like this year there's more inclusion in sports ads. I think it just gets better and better every year. Sydney felt like a really breakthrough year compared to 1996, where I was trying to watch it, but it was difficult to find coverage. But Sydney, I just felt like there was a breakthrough, and then it's just seemingly gotten better and better, and now it's becoming more mainstream. And even endorsements are getting more mainstream. I know one of my Team Canada former teammates, she's still playing, and she's on a box of Cheerios. So that's really cool to see Paralympians getting recognition such as that. What were the biggest challenges transitioning from track to basketball? That was definitely an undertaking. I was very worried about breaking the news to my personal track coach as well as Team Canada. Thankfully, my personal coach, Clayton Garine, he said, "Do you actually think you're going to make Team Canada for basketball?" And I said, "I don't know, but I got to try." And he said, "Do you think you're going to have fun doing it?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I think I will." And he said, "Then that's what you have to do." And so he was really, really supportive. He didn't try to coerce me or get me to stay, which was a big relief. The national coaching staff, like the whole organization of Track and Field Canada, they were harder to sell. They we're losing a medal winning athlete, which helps with their funding. So they were definitely trying to get me to stay and trying to coerce me, but my mind was already made up. Another big challenge with that transition was actually losing some friendships in a way, because when I was competing and training for track, it was just my work, right? So whatever I put into it, I would get out, and it was just me who would suffer. So if I skipped training or wasn't taking care of myself, it was only my performance that would suffer. And so I actually made a big mental change when I went to wheelchair basketball, and now there were all my teammates and the staff and everybody relying on me to be at the best that I could be. And so I took that very seriously and gave up a lot more. So I believe it or not, I partied a lot when I was competing in track. And as soon as I made the switch to a team sport, I said I can't be doing that anymore. And I just really tried to buckle down. And I think I lost a few friends from university that, you know, that was our thing. We'd go out and party and drink the night away. And then I was no longer doing that. So I think that was a hard thing for me. It was just getting used to, you know, maybe not being as close with those people. But so I think giving up alcohol and all that partying kind of affected me a little bit. I'd say I drifted away from some friends where that's all we really knew how to do. But it's all worked out in the end, and I'm really happy that I've kept up with that lifestyle, and I no longer miss half a day due to a hangover. What sort of swag, gear, and awards have you kept through the years? Well, just my medals for the most part. I've given most of my clothing away to kids and young athletes as well. I think I have one jersey left from wheelchair basketball. I've got some storage containers full of kind of cards and things like that, just from friends and family cheering me on, and newspaper articles. I've got a couple big photo albums full of all the newspaper clippings from the Paralympics. But over the years, I've gotten rid of most things. I think, especially living in the van, I've become, you know, just not attached to those things. I just have the memories, I have the pictures and the videos, and that's good enough for me. And of course, the hardware. After your competitive career was over, did you get into coaching other Paralympic athletes? So I actually did. As I was recovering with my shoulder injury and no longer being a competitive athlete, I did get certified through the Canadian Coaching Association for wheelchair basketball. And I did coach the high performance teams here in Saskatchewan for a number of years. I eventually did get back to playing, which I felt like I had more of an impact as a player coach than as, you know, the coach, the bench boss. I felt like I could do more on the court with some of the younger athletes than if I was just on the bench trying to get things done. So I transitioned out of coaching over a few years. Did you ever compete against Hannah Cockcroft, or was that a different division? So that's a different division. I think she has cerebral palsy, and so she would be competing against other athletes that have a similar disability to hers. Will you cheer for Tatiana? So I think you're referring to Tatiana McFadden. She's an American wheelchair racer, and I never actually competed against her, but I think she's pretty dominant. She's got probably close to 20 Paralympic medals now, and heck yeah, I'll cheer for her. I am so excited to be watching the Paralympics now. I think the first few years after my injury, I had a bit of resentment because I was no longer there, and I just, you know, had a bitter feeling about sport and going out with an injury instead of going out and having a nice retirement year the way I wanted to do it. But now I'm just excited to cheer everybody on, and I still personally know some people competing in basketball and rugby, so I am excited to cheer everybody on. I love a good underdog story. I love it when somebody dominates. I just love it all, but of course, you know, I'll be cheering for Team Canada first and foremost, and then any other deserving athlete after that. So thanks for joining me for this little Q&A today. If you have questions, put it in the comments and I will try to answer them to the best of my ability. Thank you so much to everyone who submitted questions. Really, it took me down memory lane, and now I'm even more excited to be watching the upcoming Paralympics this week. So now that you know more about the Paralympics, I hope you're as excited as I am. Follow your favorite athlete, watch a sport that you've never watched and learn all about it, and let's build this Paralympic movement and give the athletes all the cheering and support that they deserve. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. Hopefully I'm feeling back to 100% and we can go on a really cool adventure in the next video. Until then, Keep it wheel, everyone. Thanks for watching.